Welcome to Tibet This Week, where we bring you weekly news edition on His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Tibet, and the Central Tibetan Administration. These are the headlines. Sikyong meets with Canadian Member of Parliament and speaks to Tibetan communities in Canada. World leaders call on China to release the 11th Panchen Lama. Officiating Sikyong Gyari welcomes Indian delegations from RSS and senior Hindu priest to Dharamshala. Representative Rigzin Genkhang concludes conference on damming Tibet's rivers and engages with EU lawmakers. Office of Tibet London highlights Tibetan democratic model and the Tibetan struggle at different avenues. The 28th Shoton festival wraps up. Representative Singey attends 25th anniversary of UN Day of Vesak celebration at Australian Parliament House. At the ongoing official tour in Canada, Sikyong Pembasring of the Central Tibetan Administration met with Bjorn Baker, Canadian Member of the Parliament, congratulated him on his re-election and thanked him for his ongoing support to the Tibetan people. MP Baker appreciated the opportunity to meet with Sikyong and affirmed his support for the just cause of the Tibetan people. Sikyong also met with Tibetan communities in Toronto, Ontario, and Belleville, Trenton. During these meetings, Sikyong highlighted the importance of the forthcoming 90th birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, touched upon the legitimacy of the reincarnation of His Holiness, rapidly changing demographics of the Tibetan community in exile, 16th Kashak's effort to garner broader support for the Tibetan cause by engaging with international stakeholders through diplomatic channels and media outreach. Sikyong underscored that despite the ongoing challenges that increasingly draw us towards assimilation into the cultural fabric of our host nations, we must remain steadfast in preserving our unique identity. To mark the 30th anniversary of the enforced disappearance of Gendu Chökyi Nyima, the 11th Panchen Lama of Tibet, world leaders call on China to release the 11th Panchen Lama. 7 members of European Parliament from 4 political groups tabled urgent questions to EU High Representative Kaja Kallas, seeking clarity on the 11th Panchen Lama's current whereabouts and pressing EU to take a more assertive stance in advocating for his release. For the first time, Anor El-Anoni, spokesperson for the European Union, publicly expressed concern regarding the well-being of the 11th Panchen Lama. This unprecedented acknowledgement by the EU signals an increased willingness to raise issues of religious freedom and human rights in Tibet in its engagement with China. Likewise, the Swiss parliamentarians from the Swiss Parliamentary Group for Tibet, Frank Schwabe, the German Commissioner for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Andrea Di Priamo, Italian Senator, Michael Brandt, German Member of Parliament, and the Chairman of the Tibet Parliamentary Group in Bundestag have all issued statements or publicly tweeted, pressing China to speak on the whereabouts and to release the 11th Panchen Lama. Holding common sentiments and support towards the Tibetan people, these leaders held China accountable for violating personal rights and the right to religious and cultural self-determination. Office of Tibet Brussels participated in a peaceful protest jointly organized by major Tibetan associations in Belgium, along with international campaigns for Tibet and Lungta at the Brussels city centre, while Representative Tile Chugi of the Office of Tibet Geneva also participated in a similar protest in Zurich, Switzerland. On Wednesday this week, a distinguished delegation team from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and senior Hindu spiritual leaders had audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama at his residence. Later in the day, the delegation was received at the Central Tibetan Administration by the officiating Sikyong Gyari, accompanied by Additional Secretary Kunga Gyaltsen from the Department of Religion and Culture. The delegation includes prominent Hindu leaders such as Swami Sachidananda Saraswati and Sri Jayendra Puri Swamiji. Their audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and meeting with CDA leadership reflected the growing spiritual and cultural dialogue between the Tibetan and the Indian religious traditions. Last week, Representative Rigzin Genkhang held a series of meetings with members of the European Parliament. These engagements provided an opportunity to express gratitude for the recent EP resolution on the violations of religious freedom in Tibet and to discuss the way forward. At the invitation of International Campaigns for Tibet, Brussels, Representative Rigzin Genkhang also spoke at the conference in the European Parliament focused on the damming of rivers in Tibet and its human, environmental and geopolitical cost last Wednesday. Rigzin Genkhang drew attention to Tibet's strategic importance and the region's ecological fragility, warning the risk of these projects posed to Asia's major river systems and the hundreds of millions who depend on the downstream. The remark underscored the need for global climate and environmental institutions to recognize the strategic importance of the Tibetan Plateau and include it in frameworks for protection. On May 10 this month, Representative Singey of Office of Tibet, London, addressed the 3rd annual UK-Hong Kong Symposium held at Capital City College, London, upon invitation by events organizer, noted Hong Kong activist Fin Lau. Representative Yengi presented structure, journey, and guiding principles of the Central Tibetan Administration, highlighting its democratic foundation and governance model in exile. Last Wednesday, Tenzin Kunga, Secretary of the Office of Tibet, London, appealed for Tibet during a joint parliamentary discussion titled United Voices, a joint discussion about freedom in North Korea, China, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Burma, held in the UK Parliament and co-hosted by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on North Korea and Fortify Rights. Secretary Kunga addressed the severe and ongoing repression of religious and cultural freedoms in Tibet. He highlighted 2 emblematic cases, the 30-year disappearance of the 11th Panchen Lama and the recent death in custody of Tuku Hunga Doji, a respected Tibetan religious leader in Vietnam. He warned the audience about the broader threat the Chinese Communist regime poses to the international rule-based order. This Tuesday, the closing ceremony of the 28th Tibetan Shoton Festival took place at the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts in Dharamshala. The event was graced by the presence of Kundeling Tasa Chirung Rinpoche as the chief guest and Dolma Gyari, acting Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration, as the special guest. On the final day, Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts performed the opera Towa Sangmo. The 2025 Shoton Festival ran from 7th to 20th May 2025, featuring performances of 11 different operas by 14 opera associations. With a total of 482 performers, this year's event marked the largest gathering of opera participants to date. Representative Kama Singey joined the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the Australian observance of United Nations Day of Vesak held at Great Hall of Parliament House last Wednesday. The event was organized by Buddhist Federation of Australia in cooperation with other Buddhist organizations and temples from the various Buddhist traditions represented in Australia. That is all for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. See you next time.